new language learners, it is a really common mistake for beginner language learners to assume that it is so much better to learn a language abroad than it is to learn a language at home. And I know this because I also used to think this until I studied Spanish abroad, and I realized it's really not that cut and dry. Learning a language through immersion is just one tool. And it is fantastic, it is amazing. However, it is not for everyone, and it is not for every skill, every goal, every situation. In this video, I want to talk about learning a language at home versus abroad, and some things that you should think about before you start making the decision of whether or not you want to just go gallivanting across the world to learn a language. Again, amazing if it works, but it's not for everybody. So with this video, I want to help you make an educated decision about what will actually be best for your language learning, and not just something impulsive and fantastical, because a lot of people have this idea that everywhere else in the world is better than their own country. I mean, at least that's an American phenomenon. I'm not sure about other countries. It ain't true. And I'm going to talk about four key things that are very, very different between learning a language at home versus abroad. The first major difference, and probably the biggest difference, is price. So obviously it is incredibly expensive. Well, depending on where you're going, it can be incredibly expensive to go across the world to a different country where they speak your target language natively. I mean, not only is it flights, housing, food, entertainment, all sorts of things, and a different economy. If you're an American, for example, and the dollar isn't as strong as some other economy, currency, what have you. Not only that, but also depending on where you are in life right now, if you have a mortgage that you have to pay no matter where you are, if you have a job that keeps you in place and you can't just take off 6 months to go living abroad, if you have children who need you at home, if you have pets, if you have any sorts of responsibilities, it can be really, really hairy, really, really expensive to go abroad to immerse yourself in a foreign language. I mean, with getting a passport, maybe a visa, any sort of legal documents that you might need, getting your birth certificate, because if you need your birth certificate to get your passport, you need a passport to get a visa, or the legal stuff can get really, really, really tricky. And when you think about it logically and reasonably, immersion can be an excellent tool, but is not the only tool. And so when you think about it realistically in that sense, like financially, it might not be a good option. As opposed to learning a language at home. Now, obviously, this depends completely on your target language, especially the difference between more commonly learned languages and less commonly learned languages. But generally, for most commonly learned languages, it's pretty easy to find foreign language practice for either free or very, very cheap. Many people get away with spending almost no money on learning a language authentically, genuinely, especially if your native language is English. It's really, really easy to find conversation exchanges with people who are willing to share their language in order to learn your English or whatever other languages you may have. And even if you don't want to go the free route and you want to go through paid resources, which is perfectly valid, it's still going to be significantly cheaper than going all the way to a foreign country. It's going to be a lot more budget friendly, a lot less risky financially. And so if you have to take in consideration something like your budget or your job, your family, your home, anything like that, it might make foreign language immersion something that just really doesn't make sense to you. And that's okay, because you don't need immersion. You don't. It's a great option, but it's not necessary. The second point that I had to share is your level, your experience in the language. If you are not at a high enough level in your language, so I'm thinking intermediate or advanced, intermediate at the least, it's gonna get really dicey and stressful and difficult, because if you cannot communicate in the language at a base level, it's going to be really, really difficult. And I'm all for putting yourself up to challenges and rising above the challenge. I totally get that, but there is a level at which it's not necessary. It's too stressful, it's too difficult, to the point where the stress that you're experiencing just is more than is necessary, and you're not actually learning anything or enjoying the process because it's just too much. If you cannot function at all in your target language, if you are a total beginner, if you're not at least I would say like beginner intermediate. If you're not at least there, then it's going to be a really rough time. And I would really recommend you build up your skills to a certain base level before you think about going abroad. Meanwhile, learning a language at home. If you're a total beginner, totally fine. Honestly, there's no pressure so much as to forcing you to speak. You don't have to figure out how to communicate in the target language because you're at home. It really simplifies it. I mean, the expectations are pretty much on the floor just because you don't need to use the language, and it can be something that you do pretty relaxed, in a relaxed state, in an optimistic state, not because you have to, or else you cannot survive, or else you cannot catch the metro to go to work, or else you can't, call 911 or something. And honestly, making sure that you get up to a decent level of your language before you physically stick yourself into target language in a foreign country, it's a great way to avoid burnout, overwhelm, getting really negative connotations with the language to the point where you're too in your head and you can't enjoy the language. It really creates a lot of problems when we throw ourselves in too fast, and those problems can get really, mentally draining and really significant, and something that we need to put a lot of work into untangling. So if you are not very advanced, if you are still a total beginner, just don't even worry about immersion. Don't worry about it. It's fine. We can think about it later, but for right now, let's just worry about, 1 foot ahead of the other. Third point is pressure. And I talked about a little bit in the last point, the pressure of, going abroad and having to speak in the language in order to survive. But the thing is that there's a difference between feeling pressured in a healthy way, like I mentioned, feeling a healthy level of pressure to really conquer that obstacle and get some confidence, gain some skills, and the pressure of, oh my God, I am talking to the police right now, I can't understand them, and I might get arrested for I don't even know what. There is a big difference. While you are abroad, while you are immersing yourself in a target language, it is totally, completely easy and possible to avoid the target language, depending on where you are, what you're doing. There are varying levels of easy ways to avoid speaking the target language. But the fact of the matter is, you go to the grocery store, you have to speak it. You have to listen to it. You go to work. There's billboards everywhere that you can read. There's announcements happening. Go to school. You have other students to talk to. You have to listen to your professors, all sorts of things. There is significantly more pressure to overcome your obstacles and overcome your deficiencies in language in order to communicate, because you have to communicate when you are living somewhere. You have to communicate in a language to a degree. As opposed to at home, like I said, there is significantly less pressure. It's pretty much up to you when you're studying, how you're studying. There's a lot less accountability involved. You really have to keep yourself accountable or not, depending on what you're looking for in your language learning. Because while you're at home, you don't need to use the language in order to survive. You have to actively seek out that information, those conversations, a community of people who speak that language or are learning the language. While that limited amount of pressure can be great, especially at the beginner stages when you literally don't know left from right because there are 2 words. Once you get to more advanced levels, it can make it a little bit more difficult to not have that accountability, not have those environments, those situations thrust upon you, because you're just going about your day-to-day life and everything is in your native language, so you don't need to use it. There's a big difference. And finally, my last point is accessibility. So this is more poignant for less commonly learned languages, but nonetheless, it's still true among any experience, really. When you're abroad, when you are living or visiting a foreign country where they speak your target language natively, there is no issue with accessibility for practicing your target language. You turn on the TV, it's a language. You turn on the radio, it's a language. You go for a walk outside and there's a couple walking by and talking. They're talking in probably the language. It is everywhere. Your roommates, they speak the language. Your friends, they speak the language. Your coworkers, your co-students, whatever it is, they speak the language. Now, while thanks to globalization, it's really easy to find English content, especially like top 40 music. Top 40 music is top 40 everywhere, not just the US. While it's really easy to find that kind of stuff, and depending on the country you're in, depending on the city, it might be really common to come across other expats, other Americans, or they might have a really high level of English. Depending on those factors, that can like muddle it a little bit, but if you actively avoid it and actively like put yourself into non-English situations, it is very easy to do that abroad. There's no threat of running out of content to consume, conversations to have, lessons to take. It's all there. And there's no threat of running out of ways to practice, ways to learn. As opposed to at home. Again, this really depends on the language, but you are left to only the content that you have access to, which can be, a lot of people struggle with that sometimes, you know, even in commonly learned languages like Spanish and French, depending on what you're looking for, a lot of people have difficult times finding exactly what they're looking for. But basically, you are depending on the availability of movies on Netflix, on videos on YouTube, on language exchange partners that you can find and you really enjoy talking to, on music that you can find. There is definitely a threat of inaccessibility. And by that, I mean, you don't necessarily have unlimited access to the language. You kind of have to be a little bit more open to whatever. You have to be open to whatever apps are available to you. If there's only 2 or 3 apps that support the language that you're learning, you're gonna have to deal with that. If there's no YouTube videos in the language, you're gonna have to deal with that. If there's only one italki tutor, you're gonna have to talk to that italki tutor. It can be really, really limiting to build yourself up in your language while you're at home. So like I said, at the end of the day, language immersion is a fantastic tool, but it's not for everyone in every situation, in every language. It really is just one tool out of many other tools. So I really think that you should consider it reasonably, rationally, logically about where you are in your language, what your abilities are in your lifestyle, and if going abroad and immersing yourself in the country is really something that will benefit you, or if you're not quite there yet, or if your life is too complicated, any number of things. Because what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to think that you can't learn the language unless you go abroad. I'm here to tell you that is completely false. 100% false. You do not need to leave your home country in order to learn your foreign language. It can even make it more difficult depending on the factors that I mentioned in this video. In the comment section below, let me know, what do you think of learning a language abroad? Is it something that interests you, or are you perfectly happy learning your language at home? Is, you know, traveling abroad to speak the language in the native country, is that something that really inspires you and motivates you? Because it definitely does me. Let me know in the comment section below. Otherwise, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when I post a new video every Wednesday and Sunday. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time.